Hi there, I'm Rich and I'm a longtime woodworker. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pet bed for your pet, just like this one which I made for mine, out of simple 1x4s. It's a fun project, it's fairly easy to do, but it gives us some challenges in that we got to get our dimensions right and we got to get our angles right. So let's have some fun and make a pet bed. Any good woodworking project starts off with a good set of plans, and fortunately we've got some good plans here for this pet bed we're about to build. It starts off giving us an overview of what it's going to look like, even to the point of having a picture of a dog there to give us an idea how big a dog it's good for. My little dog's not that big, but she won't mind a bigger bed. And then we get what's known as an exploded view. This shows us the various assemblies and how they fit together. It gives us a general idea how the thing's put together, along with naming parts. And those names will be used throughout the plan, so they're useful to know. But this, at least we have an idea how we're going to actually get from boards to this, okay? And then we get elevation views. This is an engineering type of a drawing here. And if you're not familiar with that, let me give you an example. This is the top view, front view, and side view. It's like if we take this block of wood, this is the top view of this block of wood, just like here, okay? So to get from there to the front view, well, the front side is this side, and we flip it up and we look here, this is the front view, and that's what this drawing is. And then to get the end view, we would take the front view and flip it up on edge, in this case rotate it, and this is the side view, okay? Now when we rotate, we gotta be careful to keep the bottom to the bottom, right? So that's our engineering drawing. This gives us all our dimensions, even to the point of, like, there's a 3/4 of an inch space here between these two boards, and that's important to know. So this is how we see everything we're going to put together and how it's going to dimension out. When you do your own drawings for your own projects, dimensions are critical, because if you're trying to figure them out as you're building something, you'll probably make mistakes. The other side of this sheet, we get our detail views. Now if this was a big drawing, these would probably be on the same sheet, but we can't fit it on here. So these are different parts giving us more detail about how this goes together. For example, this back corner here is shown right here. It says back corner, okay? And we see the bottom, we see the back, and we see the side. And it's showing us how they relate to each other and the size of fasteners that are used to put it together. We have 1 1/4 inch screws attaching the rails, the side rails, to the corner piece, and then we have 2-inch screws, it says right here, attaching the back to the corner piece. And the reason the longer ones is because we're going into the edge. We got more space there, okay? We can't put 2-inch ones here or they'll stick out. And then finally we have this page, which gives us some basic instructions and our materials. Now this is actually not a material list, this is a cut list. It tells us the pieces we're going to cut. From that we're going to derive our material list, and this is important to have so we know how much material to buy, but also how many pieces to cut. It's a lot more efficient to do all our cutting at one time and then move from cutting into assembly, okay? So if we look here, we got 3 pieces that are 30.5 inches by 3.5 by 3/4 of an inch thick. That tells me we're using 1x4s, okay? A 1x4 is actually 3/4 of an inch thick by 3.5 inches wide, and the reason for that discrepancy is they cut it at 1 inch by 4 inches, but then after they plane it and sand it, this is our finished size, okay? So we see that we've got 4 different lines here that use the same size, and then our last line item is a 1x2. It's 3/4 by 1.5 inches. So we need to add up how much of this there is, and I've gone ahead and multiplied this across. And in the process, I noticed I had 2 lines that had a dimension of 22 inches long, and that almost seems like a mistake unless we look over here and we find that 4 of those pieces are side rails and the other 7 are bottom rails. So that's why it's 2 line items, so that we know how they're used. So we end up with a total of 367.5 inches of 1x4. Well, that's fine and dandy, but we can't exactly go to the hardware store or the lumber yard and ask for 367.5 inches of 2x4. We've got to ask for boards. So we're going to convert that first to feet. So we're going to go 367.5 divided by 12, and we find that we have 30.625 feet. That's 30 5/8 feet. But again, we can't go and ask for 30.625 feet. So we'll take that and we're going to divide that by the length of the boards. Boards are 8 feet long, and we get 3.828. We'll just call it 3.8 3.83, okay? We got 3.83 boards. Well, you can't buy 0.83 boards, you gotta buy a whole board. So we normally round that up to 4, but we're missing something still. And that is that we always wanna buy extra. You're gonna end up with some scrap, you're gonna end up with, you get to the end of the board and there's not enough to cut that next piece, or you're gonna have to, a bad spot in the board, maybe a knot hole, maybe a crack, that you're going to have to not use that piece. So because of that, we always buy extra. Normally I'd buy 10% extra. Because of the number of pieces we're cutting, I'm gonna do 20% extra. So we're gonna take this 3.83 and we're gonna multiply it by 1.2, and that gives us 4.59. We'll round that up and we get 5 boards, and that's what we're gonna go lumberyard to buy, 5 boards. And then for our 1x2, it's only 27.5 inches long. Well, 2 pieces of that is not going to come out to 8 feet. It's going to come out to a little less than 5 feet. So we only need 1x2. So we've got our lumber, we're ready to go. And now we just got to cut it up according to our cut list. It's always a good idea to start off with the biggest pieces. The biggest dimensions I got on here are 30.5, so that's the first thing I would cut. I've chosen to use number 1 pine, which is a good grade of pine. It does have some knot holes, but the knot holes should not be loose. You notice here there's one partial knot hole that's out, but it doesn't go all the way through the board. I'll probably try and avoid using that piece of the wood, or if I have to use it, I'll try and make sure that it's hidden. Now, most guys, you know, will cut with whatever they've got. There's so many different kinds of saws out there and so many different ways of cutting. The instructions call for using a circular saw. I've got a circular saw here. You measure it out. So I want my cut to be at 30.5 inches. Now here's something I'd recommend to you anytime using a circular saw. Take a square, whether it's a speed square or regular square, put it on the board, line up your saw at its mark, and let the saw run along the square. That'll make sure your cut is square. That's what that'll do for you. I'm not going to cut my boards here with a circular saw. I'm going to cut them with what's known as a radial arm saw. A radial arm saw is kind of like a super miter saw. A lot of guys have power miter saws. I have this radial arm saw because I've had it for 40 years. And I find it a good tool. One of these days it'll die on me and I'll buy a miter saw. In the meantime, I still use my radial arm saw. Since I have so many 22-inch pieces to cut, I'm going to set myself up a stop block so that I don't have to take the time to measure each and every one. All I've got to do is run the board up to the stop block and then cut it off.
Now that I've got all my pieces cut, the next step is sanding them. And there's a lot of different ways I could go about this. A lot of different sanders I have here in my workshop. The key is picking the right sander for the job. Now, a belt sander would go quickly, but it'll go too quickly and we'd probably damage all the pieces. The most common sander used for this would be a quarter sheet palm sander. Palm sander works well. It'll go through all this, but it's going to be slow. I prefer to use a random orbital sander. Now there's orbital sanders and random orbital sanders. Orbital sanders might leave some marks because they keep repeating the same pattern. A random orbital avoids that by keeping the same spot from coming back into contact, the same spot of the sandpaper from coming into contact with the wood over and over again. So I'll put on my hearing protection and get the sanding.
One thing to keep in mind when sanding is you don't want to sand anything that's not going to be visible. It's a waste of time. these boards, this stack, these are going to be the decking for the bottom of the pet bed, and so only the top side is going to be visible. The bottom side won't be. So if I spend a lot of time sanding that bottom side, I really don't get anything for it. These two pieces of 1x2 are going to end up underneath the decking, so they're not going to be visible. Therefore, there's no real reason to have to sand them. So I need to take the sides and the back and front and put them all together. I'm going to work upside down for the first piece because one of the really key things is trying to make sure that we get our corners 90 degrees. For that, I'm using corner clamps, okay? I actually I have two of these, and you notice I've got one here, I've got one sitting over there, propping up the under end of this piece. And really that's to make sure this is level. If I didn't have that, this piece would be angled down and it would get connected together that way. First, I'm going to be putting the top piece. Now, notice I'm working upside down. I've got my legs sticking out up here. It's really hard to use these corner clamps with everything together here. So to avoid that, I'm doing this piece first, which may seem a little backwards. But I'm able to use the corner clamp better, and I'm able to make sure I get my corner at exactly 90 degrees. Can you get by without using corner clamps? Yes, you can get by without using corner clamps. Do you want to? Probably not, okay? I only have two, and the thickness of the corner clamp, as I mentioned, is critical. So what I'm doing over here is using one of my little blocks. So this is the third piece that we had cut this length for these sides, and it's the piece that doesn't have the rails. So it's going to be the upper part. These rails exist for the slats to sit on. So like I said, I'm working upside down. I'm putting the top one on first. I've got a choice. I can run my screws through here into this piece or this piece. But if I run them through here into this piece, I'm going into the end grain. What happens when you put screws into end grain is that they actually cut the fibers of the wood, and that's really not advisable. You don't want to cut the fibers of the wood because you end up with weakening the wood, okay? So instead I'm going to go into this piece where I'm cutting into the side of the long grain, and I'm going to get a real strong connection doing that. I'm using a combination drill bit for drilling my holes here. This drill bit has a pilot hole for the screw and the counterstick in one. That saves me having to either drill the holes and then change drill bits or use two drills. It's a lot faster and easier way to go if you've got the bit. I found them to be well worth the investment. So because I'm going through into a bigger piece, I can use longer screws. So instead of the 1¼ inch screws that we used before, I'm using 2-inch screws. That gives me more material, more thread material, biting into the wood and ensuring that it's strong. Is that necessary? Maybe not, but why not? Okay, so now we'll flip over to this other end, put this side on. So now I've got those three sides. I've got to put the lower part here, and I've got to put the lower part here. These pieces, when I attached them with those spacer blocks. So they're 3/4 inch from one edge, and it looks like they're about 1.5 inches, maybe 1.25 inches from the other edge. Okay, this spacing was designed so that these slats can sit onto here and make a level deck. So I need to make sure that I attach these with this side up. Okay, the other thing I've got to do is I've got 3/4 inch of space down here, and that is for so that my leg protrudes. So I need to put a couple blocks here to hold up my we go. So that holds my this is the front. That's the back. It holds my front off of the workbench by that same amount. Okay, so I line that up. I'm lining up. I don't need to worry so much about being square here because I've made the other end square, and so that makes this end naturally square as well. Same 2 screws. Okay, so there's our bed, the entire frame, with the exception of the slats that go across here. We have 7 of these. And like other things in this project, they're spaced 3/4 of an inch apart. So obviously we're going to have to use our spacers again to get our spacing right. I'm just laying them in here right now. Now, the directions don't say how to attach these down. You could just leave them loose and put like a pillow, dog bed pillow on here and use it that way. You could put it down with screws. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it down with an air nailer. You may not have a air nailer, brad nailer available to you. If you don't, that's not an issue. If you do, it's a lot faster than drilling and putting in screws. So here's my finished pet bed. According to instructions, it can either be painted or stained, depending on how you prefer. I'm probably going to stain this. It's going to most likely end up in my office because my dog hangs out there with me all day long. So I'll make it match the furnishings in my office, but you can do whatever you want. You can leave it plain, you can varnish it, you can stain it and then varnish it, you can paint it, whatever works for you. One of the nice things about these woodworking projects is you can always customize them for your own needs. That's what part of what woodworking is. You take a set of plans and you make it fit to what you want it to do. So, looks to me like it's time for you to go and make some sawdust. Have some fun, enjoy yourself, and we'll see you next time.